Welcome to Help, I'm a Parent, Christian Parenting in the Real World. We're your hosts, Drs. Claudio and Pamela Consuegra, and together we serve as the Directors of Family Ministries for the North American Division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Today we will be discussing the fact that your teen is bombarded with sexual messages daily, much of which is inaccurate, deceptive, and plain untrue. And perhaps the most concerning of all is that almost none of that information is grounded in biblical truth. Your teen is hearing sexual messages in almost every song they listen to, every movie and television program they watch, and on the internet. If you're not talking to your teen about sex, you may be the only one that's not doing so.
We're delighted to be joined today by Dr. Nerida Bates, who is a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics and is also on the faculty of Loma Linda University.
Dr. Bates, welcome to our program today.
Excited to be here.
Thank you. And before we begin our conversation, though, we talked to some parents about this important issue of sexuality. I want us to look and see what they had to share with us.
So, I know that all of us have or are going to, in some moment or another, deal with our children and sexuality and dating. When is it appropriate to allow them to date? Or when should they, or when shouldn't they?
Well, I don't know about dating, but I know that they are, with the world of internet walking around in kids' hands, that they are at danger, if not constantly being exposed to sexuality, not even just pornography, but like just pink and their advertising. My sons go to their store and they're like, Mom, why are they dressed like that? Why don't they put some clothes on? You know, and so we have to deal with this in every aspect of our world all the time.
And it's our responsibility really as parents to make sure that we're giving them the right information and not be afraid to talk about it. I mean, yeah, is it awkward? It could be awkward, and maybe for your children, but we have to be real with them, and we have to be honest with them, and we have to be cautious with them as well. You know, we can't control their feelings.
Right.
They're going to like somebody, and so we can't control that part.
Right.
You know, I learned about sex through my friends. My parents never, ever talked about sex. It was like something you just don't talk about. My dad's like, you look at a boy, you'll get pregnant. I'm like, what? So I thought, as a parent, I'm going to get it in the forefront. Now that my daughter's in high school, you know, she's at the stage where I'm like, when do we allow her to date? You know, I feel like even as a freshman, it's still too young to be dating. So it's like, that's where I'm at. I'm like, the challenge of where do I not panic, and then where do I help her along the way of, you know, finding a healthy relationship, a boy who God is first in his life. And, you know, those were some of the questions I did ask her. Okay, this boy that you like, you know, what are his beliefs about God? Where is his faith? And she's like, Mom, he loves God. And I'm like, okay, how about his grades? You know?
Dr. Bates, we tell some people that when our daughters were younger, we told them they were not allowed to date until they were out of high school or academy. And people might think that we're being old-fashioned, but it has nothing to do with that, but brain development. You're a physician. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think that the brain is growing when we talk about teenagers, we're talking about two different groups of people. We're talking about young people under 14 who really have no boundaries and sense of self and that kind of ability to affect their future. And then we're talking between 16 and 18, they're beginning to, you know, by the time they're 20, even by 18, they're out of the house. They have to be able to make those decisions and to internalize all of the information that we're feeding them.
They're little adults, really, in some sense. And what's happening with their brain at that time?
The brain is really changing at 16. They begin to reason. They can't reason completely until they're 25. And they can't assess risk.
25, you said?
25 years old. I mean, that's after college.
You're not saying they can't make any decisions until they're 25.
But no, they have to, we're raising children to be responsible for their actions from infancy.
Right.
But they have difficulty understanding risk and understanding what the consequences will be. One of the things that I find in the office is kids come in, and if I say there's a 10% risk that this could happen to you, 100% believe that it will never happen to them.
Right.
They just can't see that risk.
So certainly putting a younger teenager on the younger end, 13, 14, 15, even 16, into a dating relationship where you're telling us they don't even have the capacity or the ability to make some of those life-altering decisions, to look down the road and see what are the consequences of my behavior.
Yes. I also think that one of the things we have to do as parents, we spend so much time talking about sexuality, but really we want to talk about sexuality in a relationship.
Well, what do you mean?
That means that we don't just have to talk about not kissing. We have to say things like, if you're kissing someone, does that mean he's not kissing someone else?
Oh.
And so kids don't understand the concept of going steady.
Yeah.
And I think as parents, one of the ways you can work on relationships is to work with your kids. So we had a rule, no dating until 16.
Okay.
But even in junior high, we said, you know, is there a family at church that just might have children that you would like us to invite to Sabbath dinner?
Yeah.
Is there someone, you know, maybe at 14, someone that you'd like to sit with us in church? You can foster friendship without fostering dating. And that gives them the idea that dating has to do with knowing someone.
And that's really a great point. You're helping them develop the skills to make healthy friendship choices, which ultimately will impact who they choose to date and later on who they choose to marry.
And friendship is a difficult skill at the moment because everybody's texting and they're not doing this interpersonal, I read your emotions, you read my emotions. We actually talk like human beings with our eyes.
Yeah. Now, sometimes inadvertently, as we as parents might encourage early dating. You know, again, we said 16 or younger, and yet you're asking, do you have a little boyfriend, or is that your girlfriend?
And I'm not even sure that we should use those terms.
Right.
I think that we should say, you know, let's get to know lots of people.
Sure.
And if there's someone you'd like to get to know, we need to know those skills.
And then the 16 and over, now we're looking at the older adolescents. So it is possible that they are beginning to develop more exclusive relationships.
Yes.
What kinds of things should we be talking to them, to our sons and daughters about?
I think our sons and daughters should know that even as married people, most of the time that we spend with our spouses is mundane, is boring, is friendship, is communicating, and not sexuality. And therefore, if they have a special someone, most of their time should be spent doing mundane things. You know, sign them up for Pathfinders, meet at the local community hall and make lunches for the homeless.
But it's really important what you just said, and I don't want to miss it. Perhaps as parents, there have been times when we have focused too much attention on the sexuality issue, when we should have been focusing on things like healthy communication and or conflict resolution. That some of those things that are so important, because you're right.
And to help kids dovetail the two. That, you know, what do you mean you're kissing someone that you don't know if they like you?
At the same time, because of the dangers of maybe inappropriate relationships, it is important that we as parents talk to them about things like, for instance, date rape.
Yes.
Is this a good time to talk to them about it?
I think that it depends a little bit on the maturity of your child. They have to have information about their body parts.
Okay.
When I see a patient starting at 5 years old, I give them the talk about private parts. You know where your private parts are? These are the rules. No one's allowed to touch but mom or dad, and the doctor with permission. Mom, can I have permission? And so you start with with private parts. As they get to be in junior high, it's a lot of work to keep track of them, but it's our responsibility to know where they are and to know that they don't have opportunities to be alone with someone of the opposite sex.
Right.
And yet we seem to be so busy as parents that might be the part that we're missing.
Yes.
We're not keeping track of our kids and who they're spending time with.
I think, my generation is the latchkey kids. We came home to empty houses. And now, as parents, we tend to hover a little more. But that's an age between 11 and 15 where you have to hover quite a bit.
That's
You
right.
have to know where they are.
Talk about the influence of the peer group as it relates to this whole topic of sexuality.
I think that peers are really important. But teenagers are getting a lot of information from who they're calling their peers, but it's really from billboards and TV and songs and all sorts
Very
all
suggestive
around
music,
them.
sure.
Yeah. And psychologists are calling this the super peer.
Super peer.
The super peer. This is the information they get from around them that they think their friends are doing. So on TV, people are having dating and people are sleeping together and
Sure.
people are doing all sorts of things, and they just assume that that's how society works. Therefore, all of their friends must be doing this.
It's kind of like Facebook.
Yeah.
Everybody's always
Yes,
happy
everyone's
on
on
Facebook.
vacation.
No one ever has a problem on Facebook. So that's what you're referring to, a
Yes.
super peer.
And psychologists have looked at this and found that teenagers believe that their peers are having more sex than their peers are actually having. And so it's helpful to talk to kids and say, you see all this information, but it's really not true. It's also important to back off the kind of information that they're seeing. And in my house, we have rules that nobody can download a song until mommy's heard it all the way through. And my kids have hunted around and found clean versions of songs they like,
Sure.
so that they're not hearing bad words and suggestive sexuality in their music.
That's because you're still the parent.
Yes.
And it seems like sometimes we forget that,
Yeah.
and we feel that because they are already acting sort of like adults, they have the ability to recognize what's wrong
Yes.
and make their own decisions.
Yes.
And yet, as much as we try to control that in our homes, our children are now at the age where they are going out, be it school, on the school bus, or
Yes.
with their friends.
Yes.
And so very often they're exposed to things that we wouldn't allow in the home.
And now it's just a phone away because somebody says, hey, look at this.
Correct. That's right.
And it really is difficult to keep a handle on the kind of content that they're seeing. And that's why I think that those years to 14 are really important to shelter our kids. And I don't think that they should be watching anything suggestive unless you're there until they're off to college. But at some point around 16, 17, if they're saying, there's a show and there's just a little bit of sexuality in it, watch it with them. Make comments. Say, wow, how did you think that? Did you think that was right, what they did? Why not? Or what consequences could it
So
have?
not necessarily block everything, but make use of those
at
to
the end
talk
of the
to them.
teenage years, I think you're going to have to, because they get to college and
Right.
Oh, this is very important. Thank you for that bit of information. We're going to continue, though, talking to the parents about this. So we're going to ask you to come back after this brief pause as we talk with Dr. Bates about those important years of adolescence and how to deal with their sexuality. Come back.
You can probably already tell that we will not be able to cover every area, every concern, or every question you may have in the short time that we have together. Parenting will continue to produce new challenges and new questions every day. As our children grow and change, so will the parenting challenges that we will face.
Therefore, our goal is to continue this conversation with up-to-date resources and practical parenting tips online via our website, helpimaparent.org. sexuality.org. There you may keep updated on our newly released parenting resources, supplemental products, and find additional material for free download. You're also invited to subscribe to an electronic newsletter, read a blog just for parents, and much more.
In addition to that website, we have a Facebook page where we post daily words of encouragement and resources. So look us up. Help, I'm a Parent. And remember to share that Facebook post with the friends in your own social network.
It is our desire that this resource will assist you in your God-given role as a parent by using principles that are firmly grounded in the Word of God. Now let's get back to our conversation with today's guests. Welcome again to this program where we're talking with Dr. Bates about adolescence and sexuality.
You know, Dr. Bates, we live in a world that is not God's ideal.
No.
You know, so we have to deal with the reality of where we are today. And things like teen pregnancy or date rape are certainly not God's ideal, but they are the reality of the world we live in. Yeah. So what are some things that you can share with us that we can do in the real world that we live in today with some of those issues?
Yeah. I have a lot of kids who come into my office and they know that mom or dad has said no sex until marriage, but they don't know how. They don't even have the vocabulary for some of sexuality. And so I think it's really helpful for parents to break it down like I do in the office.
Okay.
I say, what kind of sex is there? It starts with making googly eyes at the guy across the room.
Sure.
And then there's holding hands, and there's kissing, and there's hugging. And so I think it's very helpful for younger teens to briefly outline the steps of sexuality, all the way to oral sex and intercourse.
So you're saying there's some healthy sexuality prior to marriage,
Yes.
and then healthy sexuality after marriage.
And all of it, I call it a ladder, but really it's a slide. And it's hard to stop on the way down.
Okay.
And we need
That
to be
makes sense.
honest with our kids.
Sure.
At the same time, I talk to them about the stages of relationships. Somebody that you like. You don't know if he likes you.
Sure.
You don't know if she's into or allowed to date.
Don't fall in love immediately upon first sight.
You know, our kids have crushes. And then you talk about somebody where two people like each other. And then, you know, maybe they go on a few supervised dates with their parents. Then they say, okay, we're not going to date anyone else.
Oh, sure.
We're
More
a couple.
exclusive,
Yeah, and I think that's very important because we assume our kids know all of those little details.
But they don't have the vocabulary.
And I really like the idea of a ladder or a slide, that we actually take the time as parents. That's our job, isn't it?
And so for younger kids, I say, make a rule. For this part of sexuality, what relationship does it belong in? How old do you want to be? How long do you have to know the person before that would be appropriate?
Yeah.
And then I call it rules. You have made these rules about your sexuality. Then how can we go about protecting them?
So you're helping them to develop those rules. You're not just
Yes.
giving them the rules.
Yes. Now, I think parents give advice.
Sure.
Right.
And it's known that if parents say, I think sexuality belongs in marriage, that's a good factor, that's a better predictor. But we have to give them the tools of how to fit it together.
Right.
Sure.
And we have to say, okay, if you're not going to be doing more than holding hands, then maybe you shouldn't be in private with each other.
And that's actually a wonderful way to do it because you're engaging them in the process, and they're taking ownership
Yes.
of those decisions as they talk with you about it. We're making no assumptions that you know anything here, but I'm engaging you in this conversation that's so important for parent and teen to have.
And for the younger teens, we're guiding it a lot. And for older teens, we're guiding it, but we're giving them a little more input into how to make rules.
Without just simply saying, do whatever you want.
Yes,
Because that's what they're learning in the media. You know, you just have to meet someone, you like him, you have sex, and then maybe you decide whether you want to date them.
Movies.
Right.
They meet them, they kiss them, they jump into bed. It's the same day.
Yeah.
Why do they do that?
Yeah.
Because it's a 2-hour movie. They don't have time to tell you all about the relationship.
And that's got to be very confusing for a teenager.
It is.
You know, the parent is saying, don't do it, wait till after marriage, but the movies are saying, no, do it as soon as you feel like it.
And we can talk about how hormones make us all butterfly, and we don't, you know, stop to say, do we really like this person?
Yeah.
Are they kind?
That's all the more the reason that if we do it before we find ourselves in that situation where hormones or emotions take over, we've already had to sit down. We've really had time to think about and process some of these before we get in that situation where, you know, we're faced with making a decision that we haven't thought about.
Yes.
Yeah. We have 2 daughters. I know you have 3 daughters. Obviously, we want to have a conversation with our daughters about what's proper, how to take care of their sexuality, etc. We don't always focus on the boys, because there also have to be boundaries for the boys.
Yes.
So, what, for instance, if we had boys, what would you say to a parent that has boys?
I think that we have to talk to boys about abuse of power against them.
Okay.
And abuse of any power that they might have. Both boys and girls need to understand what is consent. And I recommend that we have consent all the way down the sexuality ladder. You know, can I kiss you tonight?
Sure.
You know, it's the beginning of saying you are a person and not an object that I play with.
Sure.
And that's really important.
Okay.
If we teach our kids that interaction and back and forth. Now, you know, there also have to be concrete rules.
Yeah.
You know, young women should not go to meet someone that they don't know. They shouldn't be picked up from their house.
Right.
They should go to a public place. They should stay in a public place. We also have to give a strong sense of yourself and that you make the rules about your body. I tell girls that if somebody says, I want oral sex, and that's not your rule,
Sure.
there's the door.
Yeah,
And they have to have the courage to say,
Yeah.
no, I'm
But
not
if-
going to,
But if you love me, you should do it.
yeah. And so we have to talk about that.
And to all my friends,
Yes,
You know,
and that kind of
doing this.
pressure. It doesn't make sense to me that one person should be ruling over another person, especially when they're teenagers. Relationships have to be an equal thing, and that takes a long time to be equal and trusting.
You know, we have talked to other guests, and in fact, in one program, we're going to talk about pornography. Not only because of its addiction, its effect on the individuals, and yet many teenagers are inadvertently involved in that through sexting.
Yes, it really is a difficult issue, and society hasn't made norms yet that we can sort of rely on, and of course, teenagers wouldn't have the norms anyway.
Right.
And so, as parents, we have to be a little bit cunning to find out what exposures they can come up with. I think for teenagers, you should have one computer in a very central place, and that I don't have internet access anywhere but in my living room.
Sure.
And so everything's public. It makes it a lot more difficult to run across things, or not run across them, but do them on purpose.
Yeah. Of course, that's computers, and I think probably most parents would agree that that's a very good rule. But now we don't have to have a computer.
Now we have phones in our bedroom.
We've got the phone, and if I don't have one, my
Somebody
friends
else
do.
does.
or even those
Yes.
video games that have back doors.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
there there's so many ways.
And so we have to talk about what is the issue with pornography. I think that people are concerned about their sexuality, and it's a known fact that if you watch pornography, you can decrease your ability to be sexually excited. That's a motivator for some teens who are very worldly and exposed.
Dr. Bates, the time is getting away from us, but what we'd like for you to do now, talk to the parents of teenagers who are watching. And let's just, if you can just boil this down into just some practical tips. You've mentioned the ladder. You've mentioned talking with them about those various things. That's a wonderful idea. What else can you share? Very practical things they can do.
I think that we should all be having dinner together. And at dinner together, we should be bringing up, there's this story on the news where somebody was abusing their power. How could we protect ourselves from that? How could we not be that person? We have to talk about...
That seems so simple, having dinner together,
Yes.
and yet so crucially important.
And sexuality has to be a part of that conversation, like all of the other
Don't be
parenting
afraid
topics
to
that come
talk
up.
to your teenagers.
Right.
You were going to say something else.
I think that just that sense of I'm there for you, and there are no topics that we can't discuss, is the message that you need to help your teens with.
And don't be shocked if they bring up something that, in fact, when it comes to sexuality, that is important to them. Don't just give them the shocked look, because that might just say to them, I can't talk to my parents about this.
You have to be brave.
We have to be willing
Yes.
to go there and discuss it, even when it may be hard for us. Maybe we're not used to talking about those topics.
But it really pays off.
Yes.
Absolutely,
Yes.
yeah. Conversation, open communication is always very critically important. Yeah. Well, I wish we could spend even more time talking about this, but thank you so much for being with us and helping us as
My
parents
pleasure.
to understand better about that conversation, ongoing conversation with our teenagers. We want to thank Dr. Bates for taking the time to join us today, and we'd also like to remind you to visit our parenting website, helpimaparent.org. There you will find additional resources and materials. And we also invite you to join us next time on Help, I'm a Parent, when we will continue the conversation about parenting teens in today's world.
And until then, remember that God has called you to be the disciple maker of your child. It is perhaps the most important role that you will ever have. And remember, you must be the one to talk with your child about sexual issues. They need you to guide this conversation and to make sure that it is grounded in the Word of God. It is our prayer that the sweet presence of Jesus may be felt in your home today.